Join me in welcoming Anika Patton.
Good morning. It's not. Hello? Testing? Okay. Good morning, guys. I'm so excited to present this to you. First things first. So I'm pretty confident that I'm not the only person who's made it to 18 without experiencing romance for the first time, right? And I'm even more confident that I'm not the only person who's a little confused as to why and how this has happened. So I feel like I've been told so many reasons, overanalyzing, hyperindependence, fear of commitment, among hundreds of different things. But the thing that I hear the most, in fact, my favorite excuse, is that my expectations are unrealistic. Now, as someone who grew up watching fairy tale love stories and happily ever afters, it's a bit of a hard pill to swallow. My expectations are so ridiculous that even I don't fit into them. It's confusing. But it got me thinking, how are these unrealistic expectations created? What is influencing us to create these ridiculous ideas about romance, so much to the point that they're influencing what we think our romantic relationships should look like? So I decided to think a little further on the topic, and thinking about what influenced me. And it actually made me think of watching SpongeBob SquarePants as a child. My parents always told me I couldn't watch it because it was a bad influence, which is ridiculous. But I started to think about other types of film media that were impacting my views and influencing my beliefs, which led me to my research question. To what extent does romantic film media affect adolescent perceptions of romantic relationships? Let's face it, most of us see romantic film media on TV shows or movies. We watch it play out on screen before we get the opportunity to experience it for ourselves, which is great, but that leads us to seeing all of these grand romantic gestures and all of these enemies to lovers and love at first sight, and it's hard. It's hard to internalize that and see that and not expect the same thing, especially when we don't have that experience. In fact, in a study done at the University of New Hampshire, Durham, it was found that through the viewing of this type of film media, people began to internalize those beliefs and start to truly believe in things like love conquers all, or soulmates are destined to be together. And sure, these are beautiful ideas, but are they really that realistic? I mean, come on. How many of us have secretly hoped for a scene straight out of Twilight or The Notebook or How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and been disappointed when the reality of dating has been awkward small talk through a dating app or Snapchat or even worse, Instagram DMs? And how many of us have just secretly wanted our romantic lives to be centered around a white house with blue shutters or somebody waiting outside your bedroom window with a boombox over their head? But it's not just about fantasy. In another study done at Appalachian State University, it was actually found that through the internalization of these romanticized ideals, that it wasn't just expectations that were being hindered. People were actually finding dissatisfaction in their own relationships as a result of viewing this type of film media, which can be problematic for obvious reasons. So here's what I did. I decided to survey students at my high school, grades 9 through 12, and I broke it up into two parts. The whole point of this survey was to identify a relationship between film media consumption, specifically romantic film media, and attitudes towards specific romance statements or romantic beliefs. So I created a list of 30 films based on their popularity and either being under the category of romance, genre, or subgenre. I had students pick from the 30 films the films that they had seen. Then I had students look at 12 different romance statements and grade them on a 5-scale Likert scale model, with the scales being, I strongly disagree, I disagree, I have no opinion, I agree, and I strongly agree. Then I took the data from that survey and I decided to break it up into 3 different categories. Those categories being students who had viewed under 11 films, students who had viewed between 11 and 20 films, and students who had viewed at least 21 films. I took the mean Likert scale scores for each statement in those 3 different categories to determine the average attitude towards the different romance statements within those categories. And I actually found that those who had viewed between 11 and 20 films had the most positive romance, had the highest number of romance statements with positive attitudes, whereas those who had viewed under 11 films had the highest number of romance statements with negative attitudes, with those who had viewed at least 21 films somewhere in between, showing that those who had viewed the films in moderation had the highest number of positive attitudes towards romantic ideals. I gave students who were surveyed the opportunity to be interviewed to elaborate further on their survey responses as well as their own romantic relationship experiences. And then I decided to code the data from the interviews in order to find common themes. And some of the themes that I found were that many students believed that romantic film media created tropes that were unrealistic, such as man of the household, frail women, knight in shining armor, abusive tropes, toxic tropes, and some even pregnancy tropes. All unrealistic, especially when looking at romance at the adolescent level. Other statements, other common themes found was that simple communication was often exhibited in these romantic film media, making it believable that simple communication was the norm. Communication wasn't hard. You didn't have to worry about miscommunications amongst relationships, and if you did, then they were easily solvable. Obviously, that's not true. Some other common themes found were that people felt like romantic film media often idealized versions of what the perfect partner looks like, making it hard to figure out what people wanted in their own romantic partner. Another, in fact, my favorite quote from all of the interviews was said by one of the participants, and it stated that love isn't a feeling, it's a choice. Now, this perfectly encapsulates what one of the common misconceptions of romantic film media and the effects that it has on our beliefs towards romantic relationships. Often we think that romance is supposed to look like somebody who checks all the boxes off on our list, somebody who's perfect, who just fits with us like glue. But the reality of romance is that you're supposed to find someone that you can build a connection with, someone who strengthens you, who's willing to grow, who's willing to go through the confusing communication that is just what's realistic, and still staying with you. One of the interesting things from my study is that there were three romance statements that had positive attitudes across all 3 categories. With those 3 statements being, I believe that guys should pay for dinner on the first date, I believe that love can come in unexpected or untraditional ways, and I believe I have a soulmate. There was one statement that had a negative attitude across all 3 groups. That one statement was, I believe that a couple should break up when facing troubles and reunite later on stronger than before. This is another example of how romantic film media has affected our perceptions of romance. Ideas like chivalry and men paying for dinner on the first date, as well as ideas such as having a soulmate and the destined to be together. Now, why does this matter? Tying it back to myself and my own experiences, I'll be honest. I haven't truly faced romantic relationships because I've been scared. It's scary to try and find someone that you're supposed to match up to, someone that you want to meet their expectations as much as you want them to meet yours. But here's what I've found. Like I said earlier, love's not about finding someone that checks boxes on your list. It's about finding someone who's willing to grow, who's willing to connect with you, and willing to fight through the struggles of being in a relationship. So, although I'm not the most experienced, I'll give you guys my 2 cents. I think that we shouldn't scrap our expectations of love. Instead, I think we should start to examine them. Question where our beliefs come from, why we believe in them, why those are our expectations, and why that's what we want. In fact, I know I for sure will not be ditching my expectations when it comes to romance, but I do plan on examining them and thinking about whether or not the film media that I'm consuming and that's shaping my expectations, whether it's helping me or hurting me in the world of romance. And let's please stop comparing our romantic relationships to those of films and the Hollywood ones, because as gorgeous as they are so fake. I think what we need to do is we need to look at what's influencing us. What do we want in a relationship? What is inspiring us to pursue romance? And what kind of love we deserve. Not movie love, but real love. And so, here's to figuring it out, one real connection at a time. Thank you.